Lifestyle Pirates with Big J and Adriano.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Lifestyle Pirates. We are joined this morning by Jen. Oh, let me start again. I didn't introduce me and you.
No, keep going.
All right.
Keep going.
Morning, everybody.
Love the blooper.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Lifestyle Pirates with me, Big J, and him, Adriano.
Uru.
We're joined this week by Jen Webster, who's the Fundraising and Community Engagement Manager at Rough Edges here in Sydney. How are you, Jen?
Good morning. I'm great, thank you.
Welcome along. Thank you for coming over from the Northern Beaches.
Yes, all the way from the Northern Beaches.
Much appreciated. How was the traffic?
Traffic was fabulous.
Marvellous. Well, what I'm loving about this podcast that we're doing is we come up against and hear against community a hell of a lot, and we're going to be talking about the communities that you're working with today. And a big shout out to Scott Duncombe, who actually connected the two of us as well.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you very much to Scott. So tell us about Rough Edges, Jen.
So Rough Edges is a community drop-in centre for people who are experiencing homelessness, but more than that, marginalisation and social isolation. Mm-hmm. So it's really a safe space for people who probably are on the outside of society, on the margins of society.
Now, homelessness makes sense. What's marginalisation?
So marginalisation are people that feel like they don't fit in. So I love the history of Rough Edges. It was established by two churches as a safe space for sex workers and transgender sex workers working on William Street back in the 80s.
Right.
So it's built on a model of inclusion and care for the most marginalised. We're finding more and more that it's people who are lonely that are coming. So they may have some form of housing, but they're looking for connection and for a community that they feel that they're not judged, they're not spurned, they're not looked down on. It's just, a space that they're comfortable in with their own group.
Yeah, perfect. And you've been there for just over a year. I think it's been around since 1996, is that right? Rough Edges?
Yeah, so in its current location, it was started in 1996.
Yeah. And so how did you arrive doing what you're currently doing?
So I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I kind of fell into work and fell into the IT industry. Love that because it's so dynamic and it's a lot of fun. But found over time that corporate just wasn't, didn't provide the meaning that I wanted. And I think becoming a parent changes your views on life and wanting more out of the time that you spend in your workplace. So I was really lucky. I had a classic corporate job and wanted a bit more flexibility and was offered to do corporate social responsibility for a large organisation. That then was my introduction to charities. And this, I kept sort of dealing with all these charities. And I call that the dream job. You're spending corporate money on good causes. It's like, how, there's nothing better.
And getting paid for it as well.
And getting paid for it. But I'd keep working with these charities and I'd think, that's such a nice space. And it feels, and all the people I met were pretty amazing, all do, a range of causes. And I just thought, maybe this is something I should go and look into.
Very good. And so did you come across Rough Edges in your role, or how did that connection occur?
No, so I, probably like a lot of us, live in a bubble, and I used to drive to my bubble in Macquarie Park. I didn't have any visibility of people who might be doing it tough. Of course you know it's out there, but when you don't see it and it doesn't impact you, you're not, your awareness isn't there. Yeah. So I started commuting the first time. I'd commute into the city and I'd get off the bus and I'd see Rob, the big issue vendor at York Street, and then I'd see Stuart sitting there, and then I'd see Sarah down at QVB, and I'd see all these people and I thought, this just seems so wrong, that in a country like ours where we have incredible wealth, that we also have this incredible poverty. You think it's the conditions are almost third world. But I would sort of, my journey was fairly slow. I would sort of see these people and I think, how did they get there? What on earth led them to be now begging on the street? So over time I'd stop and it would be a simple start with, would you like a coffee? Hi, and I'd just have a chat. And I'd get to know their stories. And the more that I got to know their stories, the more I thought, everyone needs to hear these stories. Their stories are amazing. There's these great characters on the street who are just the most beautiful human beings.
What I love is you just gave them all names as well.
Yeah, or they have names.
Oh,
That's their
absolutely. But I guess it's humanising them.
Yeah, that's it.
Which is amazing. We spoke before we press record on this show called "You Can't Ask That" on Netflix, which we've just started watching. And in the short episode that we saw, just taken a lot out of. They do speak to homeless people, and it does humanise when you sit there and look at them and hear their stories. Because I think one of the I don't want to use the word challenge, but one of the blockers maybe is, do you, if you see a person experiencing homelessness, do you give them money? Do you offer to buy them a coffee? How does someone stimulate a conversation? And I think it's probably just easier just to carry on walking and rather than actually stop and pause. And so how did you start a conversation with Paul and the other two?
Yep.
Yeah.
So my big thing is just acknowledge their humanity. If you're not comfortable doing anything else, at least look them in the eye and wave and smile. Just acknowledge that they're there. So my friends on the street tell me the worst thing is that being invisible, that literally people walk past you and your worth or who you are is so diminished by people simply ignoring you. So for me, I guess I'm a bit of a curious person. I was like, well, hi, can I get you anything? And that's that simple act of saying, can I get you a coffee? And then the coffee becomes this sort of opportunity to say, is there anything else? So one of my first people that I got to know was this lovely man called Stuart. Now, Stuart is probably a typical case of, the non-stereotype that people might assume about someone experiencing homelessness. So Stuart, like me, lived on the Northern Beaches. He'd had a workplace accident, couldn't work. That put strain on his marriage. He's got 3 young kids, had the big house, the 2 cars, the whole shebang. His marriage broke up and his wife said, well, you need to move out because it's not working. So he moved out and quickly worked out that you can't afford to live really anywhere as a single person. So he, eventually found, he could have some housing initially and then, found himself on the street. And it was like, you just think this is someone's brother, someone we know.
Yeah.
Stuart's an educated...
And not his fault.
And not his fault.
Yeah.
Not at all his fault.
I mean, you mean stereotype is a massive thing. That's I don't want to kind of gloss past that because I think people do have a natural, it's their fault that they're on the street. Does the media play a bit of a role in that? I mean, we'll get back to some other stories, but, rather than framing it as the overall issue of being, people of experiencing homelessness, are they actually just drilling down too much on that person? And so the assumption is it's their fault that they're on the street.
Never thought about that. I think... Yeah, I don't know if the media play a role. It's more, you get back to the issue of why are there people on the streets. And there are people on the streets because there's not enough affordable housing. Like there's not enough appropriate and suitable housing. So when we talk about homelessness, one stat that blew me away was that the visible part, so I'm talking about rough sleepers that I see, that's 7%. That's a tiny, tiny percentage of overall homelessness. So there are layers of homelessness and it's people sleeping in their cars, people in caravan parks, in temporary accommodation, people in boarding houses, in squats, couch surfing. It's much bigger than we see.
So that's 7%, or all of the other things collectively are more than 7%?
7% is the one you see on the street.
Right.
Yeah, 7% is the visible.
So do we have an idea on what the overall percentage is of those? I guess, variations
In
you
terms of
mentioned?
numbers?
Yeah.
So in New South Wales, there's 37,175. Now, that figure is taken from the 2016 census.
Right.
We haven't had a census since then to understand the numbers. There are rough sleeper street counts. I participated in one at the start of 2020 on the northern beaches and was shocked to discover how many people are sleeping in their cars in the beach car parks. Again, you just don't see it.
So when you said that 37,000, was it 37,000?
37,000.
Are they rough sleepers or
No,
or
that's overall
um,
homelessness.
homeless community or
Yep.
homelessness? So, wow, that's a massive number.
So what are the kind of stories that you're seeing in the community? So when people come in for a coffee into this Rough Edges, because it's a coffee shop ultimately, isn't it? It's a kind of cafe.
Yeah, it's a cafe and they come for a meal.
Yeah. So what are the kind of stories that they're hearing? I can imagine you get a nice rapport and you build relationships with these people as well. And so are you seeing them kind of help themselves out, or do you get to kind of just, I use the word nurse, but just help them with their current situation? Like, how does that all work?
It's absolutely different for every person. So depending on their circumstances. So let's think of a couple of people. So when I first started, you mentioned I joined just over a year ago. And the week I started, it was like, okay, everyone, you're going to go work from home. I was like, no, I need to see. And as an essential service, we were able to stay open. And there were these two beautiful older men that I met, Jack and Andy. And, I would sort of see them and have a little chat. But what I noticed over ensuing weeks is that they weren't coming for food. They were just coming to see each other. So that human connection piece suddenly struck me. We've got people we've got people that come to us in absolute crisis. So, something's happened. They might be dealing with mental illness. They might be having an absolute down spiral. Our model is we'll move them from crisis to sustainability, or at least just to have some sort of stable position. Now, we're not a refuge, so just to put that into context. So ours is really literally just come to us for services, and I liken it to triage. So like in a hospital, you go in and it's like, okay, what do you need done? So then we say, okay, do you need a referral to housing? Do you need your pet looked after? Or does your pet need some work with pets in the park? There's all sorts of things that people need. Do you need some legal support? Do you need, what are the layers of support that you need? And look, everyone's so different. So that's sort of the extreme end. But then mostly we get people that just come to us every time we're open because they want to have a meal and they want to catch up. And they're at varying points in their life. So one example is Tony, and Tony actually is employed by us now as an urban walker, and he leads groups on walks around Darlinghurst and King's Cross, and he weaves his story into the walk. So it's an educational program that teaches people about urban poverty. And Tony weaves his story. Now, Tony is probably just like you and I. Tony grew up in a middle-class family, went to a very good school. He happened to have an alcoholic, violent father. So, Tony's life didn't go the way that, you'd expect for anyone in his position. Tony, that sort of threw him for a while. He left home, got into some youth housing support. Once you're 18, you're on your own. Now he built a lifestyle, but he was constantly dealing with the trauma of his childhood. So his life would cycle around, and he might have a bender with alcohol. And so Tony was very enterprising. He'd always get a job and he'd always get housing, but he'd go on a bender to deal with the stuff he was dealing with, and then, wake up with a hangover, not get to his job, lose his job, not have money, lose his house. And that would cycle, would repeat many times over years. And for Tony, at a point, he just went, this life is not sustainable. I need to do something. So he came and did some volunteering with us. Actually, I might have the order out of order, but he ended up doing some volunteering with us. And then once we got to know him and heard his story, and he's so articulate. He's an incredibly smart man. And he's got a real, he talks when he takes groups around about it costs more to keep people on the street than it does to house them. So if you think about someone's rough sleeping, the justice, so policing costs, the health costs, so the in and out of hospital much more because it's not a healthy lifestyle. And just the services that it takes to keep someone on the street, it costs far less, and there are figures, to put them in a house. Do you think, as just an economic model, it makes far more sense to house people than it does to let them rough sleep?
So why aren't we doing that?
Oh, it's a bit of a political game. So it's, New South Wales has systematically been reducing the number of social houses they have and handing it over to the private sector.
Yeah.
But I can't really speak to this, but I would guess there's more money in, standard developments. You could take a block of land in a city and develop that into a commercial building and make far more money than you would if you turned it into social housing.
All right. So
There's a degree of NIMBYism as well, where people think if there's a boarding house in their suburb, then it's going to attract the wrong type. And I'm yet to understand what the wrong type is, but it's not anyone I've ever met.
So is it different in each state then? You mentioned New South Wales. So would Victoria, South Australia, they'll all be different? They'll,
Yes.
I guess, handle this challenge differently?
Yes.
Right.
I mean, and the issue is because of our government structure. So you've got local government. So Sydney City Council manage some property, New South Wales government manage some, and then federal government. Federal tend to hand it back to the states to manage. But you would think as a policy it would be far better to manage manage this as a Australia-wide.
Sounds like a hot potato that no one wants to sort out.
Yes.
What would you like to see in an ideal world?
In an ideal world, I'd like to see just a focus on looking after our most vulnerable populations. So one interesting thing is at the moment, 41% of people accessing homelessness services are women and children who've experienced domestic violence. The other increasing stat, which has been the fastest growing for a number of years, is that older women are falling through the cracks. So women who may separate late in life don't have, may not have worked, they may have been stay-at-home parents, don't have super. You can't get, as I said, housing's incredibly expensive. Yeah, it's we're really failing our incredibly vulnerable population. So what I'd like to see is that there is an absolute national federal focus on housing that trickles down through the states, through to local, and that we prioritise people. I mean, the model of if you have a house and you have some money, then you can afford to support someone who doesn't. And I think, and that's why probably will ultimately end up being the community that end up supporting as they do at the moment.
The City of Melbourne recently criminalised, well, not recently, they were criminalising rough sleeping, and there was people at Flinders Station that got taken away, and it was a big thing that happened in Melbourne. What does that do to, I suppose, the outlook on people experiencing homelessness and the cause and, what you're trying to fight for and stuff like that? Because it seems like it's completely counterintuitive. They're sort of making a stigma by turning them, just because you're experiencing homelessness does not make you a criminal.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what you see when you see that. They've criminalised that, and people around Flinders Station have been taken away, so you automatically assume they're a criminal.
Yeah.
It's crazy. What's that doing to the sort of what you're trying to do in rough rough edges?
I mean, they did the same thing in Sydney and Martin Place. And I forget
Gladys.
Yeah.
Gladys. And they asked her what she thought about that, and she goes, it just made me feel uncomfortable, so I wanted to get them around.
Yeah.
I beg your pardon? Like, you're supposed to be the Premier of New South Wales and you just said that. Clover Moore doesn't really like her, I don't think.
My impression is that people who, do that, put that stigma on groups experiencing homelessness, probably have never stopped to chat to someone in that. Or if they have, it's been with an agenda.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. That stigmatising and that moving the whole community. I mean, where are they going to go?
Yeah.
Like the Martin Place community, they, to me it was fabulous because it put a spotlight on the issue. And it was, I thought that was perfect. And Martin Place is still a hub. So every night there's different services that go down and provide barbecues and clothing and books and health outreach. But you think, where are those people supposed to go? And my understanding is that Martin Place community were pushed out sort of to Redfern or to, it's like...
But that's not addressing the problem at all.
Not at all addressing the problem. So sometimes I shake my head just thinking at the end of the day, these are human beings. So you think, would you do that to your own, if your family were camping outside your house and you didn't like it, would you just, pick them up and move them to somewhere else? It sort of defies me that we dehumanise groups because it doesn't suit, it doesn't either look good or it doesn't suit us to have that problem to deal with. I mean, what's super interesting is like Darlinghurst as a community is so interesting. I call it my parallel universe because it's, we have got this mix of life, and that's to me reality. You've got roughs, people who are tough. You've got people who are talking to themselves. You've got people going off in the street. You've got people yelling at each other. And then you've got sort of, incredible wealth walking through as well. Sometimes it's a bit of a rat run in front of our place when the cafe's open. You've got people all hanging out the front, and then you've got sort of the well-heeled people walking through. And to me, that's reality. And why there's a concentration there is because that's where the services are. And that's especially why there's lack of visibility. So before I started here, I thought, right, if I really want to work in homelessness, so just sort of backtracking a bit, I'd get to meet all these people, and I thought maybe, this became a bit of a passion, and telling their stories became a thing. I thought maybe I need to work in this space. So before I did that, I did some shadow work with a group in Manly, and I thought, there's no homelessness in Manly, surely. Well, there's lots of homelessness in Manly. It's just not visible. And I would propose there's lots of homelessness in not lots, but there's homelessness in every suburb, but we just don't see it. And why in Manly it's less visible is because there's smaller numbers, so it's less safe. So, when you've got a big community sleeping rough at either Green Park or Belmore Park, there's and Central Station, there's quite, there is a community and there's safety in those numbers.
So going back to your transition, from, I guess, big corporate to charity and not-for-profit work, how was that for you?
Look, I loved my time in corporate. I found for me that I really wanted to have a job with meaning. And it was an utterly selfish decision because, I earn about half my income, and I probably work harder than I've ever worked in IT. But I think part of it was also that I wanted a job that not only could I feel good about, that I felt that, would reflect, that my kids would go, okay, good, Mum, I just needed to do something that I felt had more meaning for me and, could use any of the skills I had and put them into a space where I could be helping others.
So that would be one of the things you would, I guess, make people aware of. It's like if you do want to work in this sector, it's not company cars and corporate credit cards and expense accounts. No,
there's none of that. Someone the other day said, I won't pay for admin fees, and I said, well, you don't have to worry about that. We don't have an admin. I do my own admin.
Yeah. So on that, so how do you guys? Your role is fundraising and community. How do you raise money for the charity and for the community?
So a lot of it is just hustling, really. So we are lucky we have a few major donors that support our work and have kind of been involved.
You can give a shout out if you want.
So a lot of people, interestingly, in this space like to remain anonymous.
Okay, but, sorry, I thought you meant corporates, sorry.
No corporates. Love to meet some corporates. Any corporates, got some great opportunities for you. Actually, I am getting some support from Atlassian at the moment, so I will give them a shout out.
Perfect.
But we have, so some major donors who just, see that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So they put some money into it.
Have they been on the journey themselves?
No, it's really interesting. Like, there's some people who are connected to the cause through different avenues, and others who just think, this is
the right thing to do.
the right thing to do.
That was one of my other takeouts on this little doco here as well, was just the spectrum of people. It wasn't your typical, big chap, bushy, long hair. It was young ladies that just come from school or, come out of school or come out of university. It was young mothers. And part of it was, they still take their kids to school, then they've got to work out where they're going to go and have a shower and how they're going to get food and then all that kind of stuff. So there's a massive, massive spectrum of people that are in this situation. We
would estimate that around 90% of people who come to our service have childhood trauma. So unresolved childhood trauma. And if you think back to that story of Tony, so Tony, dealing with that kind of stuff, it takes years. And so for some people, they're stuck in this cycle, and then you get others like Tony that just go, okay, I've got to, I need to do something. I need to move forward. And they can only do that when they're ready. They are the experts of their own lives. So we can't say to people, get your act together, move on, come on, get over it. You don't ever get over stuff like that,
Let's face it, when people get into a relationship as well, or they have their own community, that brings out the best in them and can help them overcome. So if you haven't got that, then it's just going to be forever that vicious circle. And especially if you're feeling invisible, then it's just going to be towards the dark side than the bright side.
The other misnomer is people say, well, just go and get a job.
Yeah.
Think about someone who's in unstable housing. How on earth, your whole day and all of your energy is spent on finding food, finding things like a shower, thinking about where you're going to get a bed or a safe space the next night, because some places are literally night by night.
Right.
So as soon as you get up the next day, you've got to be thinking about how to get housing again that next night. Where in that equation do you have time, resources, energy to think about, oh, well, yeah, I'll just send off that application for that job, or I'll just browse Seek, or it's not, we need to get people
how do they get onto Seek?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a classic. So a lot of, people have phones, but they won't have smartphones. So that whole, you think about everything being moved to digitisation. How do they access that stuff? If you don't have, the latest smartphone and data, we've got people on prepaid plans, on a basic phone. It's just, I think, the world moves ahead, but it ignores those most vulnerable.
Is that something, because I noticed at Rough Edges you've got, the Banksia women piece, which we can talk about. You've got the community assistance. You've got the legal services, urban exposure. I mean, could recruitment be part of that? Is that perhaps on the roadmap for the charity?
Recruitment,
as in helping them to place them in, helping them, the community to say, look, we've partnered with someone, that if you do want to, if you get a job or volunteer, then we've got someone to help you along with that.
Yeah, that is such a beautiful segue, because I was trying to think, how do I slip in? So one of the things last year...
I told you I like to talk.
Yeah. So last year we thought, because essential service, but we had to, like most cafes and things, move to a takeaway model.
Yeah.
So a lot of the magic at Roughies, as we call it, is inside, and people just hanging out together, and someone will start up, someone will get on the piano and play. Someone might be watching the football on TV, someone might be playing a game of Scrabble. It's all this sort of activity that's happening inside alongside our volunteers that are there. So Rough Edges at night, just to explain that, is totally volunteer run, which kind of did my head in when I started. It was like, but our volunteers are fully trained in things like nonviolent communication and boundaries and addiction, and just understanding all of the issues about the people that we're supporting. So last year people couldn't come in. We thought, if they can't come in, how do we take Rough Edges out? So we started a couple of new skills programs. We're still trying to, anyone with ideas on a refresh of that word, that name, I'm happy to take it. So we started, with the help of a lovely local chef, a cooking program. I just said to people, so we asked the patrons, as we call them, what would you like to do? And so had this laundry list, and out came cooking and photography. So we started cooking with the local chef, and had this, again, saw this disparate group that didn't know each other. By the first couple of weeks, they were all laughing and they'd built this community. And again, that's part of it. It's the end goal might not necessarily be a job as a kitchen hand or a cook. The end goal might just be that we've, formed a mini community there, another support group for each other.
Yeah, but it's also something for them to look forward to as well. If you've got your photography course, once a week, then they would live for that. In the same way that people look forward to going on a holiday or going to the gym or what have you, to have that thing as part of their week and their routine. That's such a big headspace.
Yeah, and that's right, that routine. So the photography is a great one, and this is exactly where, I'd like to see it evolving. So we started photography last year thanks to the help of a group called Professional Photographers, the Australian Centre for Photography. And that has just blossomed. And so people have gone through now a couple of courses and they've had some private mentoring. And that actually culminated in us last week going to an event where we pitched for funding for this particular program. But we took one of the students from the photography program and she was their official photographer and took some stunning photos. And so that would be my goal is, how do we, even if we inspire people to want to go on to further study, what's next? That whole, what are the goals that you want for yourself in your life and how can we help empower you to get there?
The cooking one's good as well because I can imagine that skills that they can use when they're out and about and when they are kind of getting food and trying to support their families or what have you, they can use those skills as well.
And also, food, so much of our social lives are built around food.
Yeah.
So,
Preaching to the converted there, Jen.
Yes, I'm built for comfort, not for speed. And then, a future goal for the cooking one would be come and be part of the cooking program, but then you're cooking meals that go back into Rough Edges to support other people. So it's this lovely circular community, and out of that, like out of photography, we'd love to see people like Grace, who came and took the photos last week, rise up and be like a peer leader within the photography group and start off a special interest group where they meet once a week. Another thing I'd love to do is get the photography students to go and take photos of all of our very cool street art and turn those into greeting cards that we can sell.
Yeah.
So kind of build a social enterprise around the skills of the people that we're supporting.
Yeah. Well, I do some other events as well, so maybe we'll get one of them to come along and take photos at our events, which we'll talk about that. I'm glad you mentioned the training, because in the same way that I was referring to, people walking on their commute and maybe apprehensive around engaging in conversation, that would be one of my things if I said, well, I want to get involved with this, but I've never dealt with this or I don't know how to diffuse a situation or things like that. So what's the training like?
So I did my training in February. So I just to explain about me. So my previous role in another organisation, I was so inspired by the caseworkers that I sat next to that I went back and retrained as a caseworker. So I'm trained, but I'm not brave enough to use those skills yet. I think I'll just stick with my business skills. But the training I think it's incredibly eye-opening, and that whole skill around nonviolent communication is just diffusing. So in terms of if people, thinking, what if people go off at me or, I've had people yelling at me or I've had people walk past people who are yelling. You kind of know when to engage, and this is what I guess it teaches you is when do you engage or when you don't, when do you kind of shut the door? One great story I heard was we had a chap, this is one of our volunteers, a chap was sort of raising his voice and Robin in the end said, I think I was going to give him a pseudonym, but, Mick, you're scaring me, you're frightening me. And he just went, I never meant to frighten you. It just toned it right down. One of my favourite stories is when I walk around Darlinghurst, often see a lot of our patrons and saw one of our patrons said, hi, Joe. And she turned around and said, piss off. And I said, fair enough. You don't feel like talking. You don't look. Anyway, and I thought nothing of it. Yeah. But weeks later, I was standing out the front of Ruffy's and Joe came up and she said, look me. And I said, hi, Joe, how are you? And she looked me up and down and said, a few weeks ago you asked me how I was and I told you to piss off. I want to apologise for that.
Oh, wow.
I was amazed that she'd thought about it because I just went, look, I loved your honesty. You know, I think maybe we could all do with a bit more like,
I know, right?
not at the moment, thanks. So yeah, I haven't. You know, I think you just learn that it's not about you. It's if someone else is going through their stuff and they might be angry, and they might be having a hard day. You know, there's one beautiful man and he's sort of up and down, and I've seen him kind of pulling all the weeds out the front of, all the plants rather, out the front of St. Vincent's. And I was going, hi, Matt, how you doing? And it's kind of been enough that he's gone, oh, yeah, okay. And then, I walk on because I'm like, that's a whole long involvement.
Yeah.
So it's not like a certificate that you come away with. It's more just life skills training.
I would absolutely call it life skills.
Yeah.
Okay. So the training program that we give for our volunteers is definitely life skills.
Yeah. And have you seen, I guess, King's Cross has been in the press a hell of a lot over the last few years with the the development and the changes, and I guess the police activity and the King hits and things. Has that impacted what you've seen at Rough Edges? Have you had more patrons, less patrons?
During COVID, so I mean, I probably only speak to the last year, but before COVID, they were getting anywhere from sort of 70 to over 100 people a night for a meal.
Wow.
During COVID, when they first housed everyone, and this is interesting, back to that conversation about housing, I mean, when there's a political will, we can do it. We can absolutely house people. So people were all people who were rough sleeping were all put up in hotels. And, granted the hotels were empty, but I think it just, to me, shows us that we can do it when we really want to. So the numbers did drop off, and we're seeing them now that Job Seeker has dropped off. We are seeing the numbers creep back up. We're also seeing quite a few new faces turning up. So there's there's just the numbers have fluctuated quite a bit. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
That's okay. And are this, I guess, are the stories the same? I mean, is it still, I guess domestic violence and losing their way, that kind of stuff, is that all still, there's no end in sight for that?
Yeah, look, I think, in terms of the domestic violence piece, that we need to keep shining a light on, stuff like domestic violence thrives in the darkness, and when no one speaks about it and no one stands up and calls it out. I met a fabulous couple just a few weeks ago. They'd just come up from Melbourne, moved to Sydney, I think, wanted a better life. And this is the other thing, I talked before about Darlinghurst being quite busy, but the services are there. So there's another lovely couple who, he grew up in Ipswich, and I forget, she grew up in the country, and they're in Sydney because they've both got chronic health issues and they need to be close to the services that can support them. So that's often why there's this concentration in the inner city. But back to this couple from Melbourne, they were just Punky and Mouse, and they're just fabulous, fabulous. A couple of the most interesting people I think I've ever met. He's this sort of multi-talented musician, can just apparently, heard a piece on the piano and then just played it. And,
Oh, wow.
We've got a couple like that, a guy that has taught himself to play piano by ear, and he'll often just come in and play piano for us. And it's a bit, that's also a relaxation for them. It's just sort of a way to, work, soothing, I suppose. That sounds a bit condescending, but it's, it's probably a great outlet for someone who needs to express their talent or what they're going through.
Yeah.
When you play an instrument, you sort of disconnect from everything else that's around you. You just sort of go into that moment. It's great.
Yeah.
You find it quite meditative, don't you?
Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely when you create nothing from, something from nothing. Yes.
when you create nothing from nothing.
Yeah. Story of my life.
I don't know. We've been doing this a year.
Yeah, episode 52.
Absolutely, absolutely,
That's something from nothing.
absolutely. How would you like to I guess try and break down the stereotypes? To try and get rid of this misunderstanding from the general public around persons that are experiencing homelessness. Is it how they got there, who they're with? How would you like to see that kind of start to unfold and get more understanding?
I think, as we were saying before, my big thing is let's humanise it. So, and if that means that more people are inspired just to at least say hello to someone on the street. You touched on before about, what do? Do you give the money? Do you buy them something? I happily give people, I love supporting big issue vendors. I think that's quite a good model. I will give people money, and I've had other people go, but what if they buy drugs with it? What if they do this? And it's like, that's their choice. That's dignity of having the choice, like the rest of us do.
Yeah, people have a job and they buy drugs.
Yeah.
It's no difference, yeah.
And, think about drugs. What's Brené Brown says, the opposite of addiction is connection. So think about why people might have addictions to drugs or alcohol, and it's because they're disconnected from the world or society. So to me that makes absolute sense. That, you're looking for something to fill.
You're numbing the pain.
Yeah, just numbing and, numbing what you're missing. So I think first step, just, humanise, say hello. If you'd like to know more in a safer environment, come and do an urban walk with us. Come and hear from, people with a lived experience of homelessness. We've got 3 key walkers, and all of their stories are very different. And again, they're people like you and I. They're just people whose lives have taken a different path.
And when do the urban walks happen?
So we run them on demand. So they're run as people want to happen. So next week, for example, we've got, and this is where the corporate piece can come in and we can tailor them. So I've got a group coming from a pharmaceutical company. They're going to go on an urban walk and then come back, and we're going to do a panel discussion about mental illness, because they deal in brain disease all the time, but they don't actually talk to people with lived experience. This is a great opportunity for people working in a space to understand more about what it's really like.
Yeah.
Another group are coming the following week, and they're going to go on an urban walk and then come back, and we're going to talk about resilience. Because if you ever want to meet people or understand resilience, you go and talk to people that have a lived experience of homelessness, because you have to be resourceful, very hopeful, and incredibly resilient. So, yeah, so we and we do a lot of school groups. So a lot of, particularly private schools, do service learning. So they'll have groups go and participate in different activities, and part of that might be coming on an urban walk with us.
So they can be during the day, on a weekend, in an evening.
Yep.
It's kind of
we just tailor
have
them.
the conversation and see when it can happen.
So one thing I propose to quite a few groups is either come and do one in a late afternoon and then go out for a team dinner, or if you want to do half a day, then come and do it and then go and have lunch, or come and clean out roughies, or do we'll find something for you to do. So we do them as required.
And what's the kind of feedback and response that you've seen from some of the groups?
So finally, I was reading a couple of surveys yesterday, and it's what was one? I mean, people are always often a bit gobsmacked that they don't realise, probably a bit like me, that they didn't realise how prevalent it was. They also didn't really understand the path of how someone might get to experience homelessness, and why would you unless you've had to or you work in this space. Grace, one of our walkers, her story's a fascinating one, and her story centres a lot around addiction. Hearing Grace's story, just a sidebar there, inspired me to go and have a look more into, because we demonise illegal drugs, but I went and did some research and was kind of shocked, but really not surprised to understand that more people die from prescription drugs, opioids, and alcohol and smoking than they do from heroin. It's like, and yet so much focus is put on, illegal drugs, and you go, and yet, alcohol is this supported industry, and the government happen to make a lot of money out of it.
Yeah, it's crazy. In America, most of the people that get onto actual heroin started off with opiates. They started off with painkillers and stuff like that, and then after a while, it was just cheaper to get heroin. So then they've moved from those medicinal pharmaceutical grade drugs into shit that's just made in toilets and and whatnot. So yeah, the epidemic started pretty much from Big Pharma. So.
Wow.
It's pretty heavily regulated over here though, from the opioids. So my wife's just had a back operation and she's been on some serious painkillers, which they are opioids.
Yeah.
And it's they were coming out of a safe from the pharmacy, and it was right. Who are you picking these up for? Show me ID. It was pretty heavy. Wasn't allowed too many, so, which is a good thing hopefully. But it's a valid point on your side. Tell me about this rough. I'm gonna bugger up this Roughtober in October. That's why I'm getting confused. This Roughtober event in October. That's I'm not gonna say it sounds fun, but it sounds like a great initiative to raise awareness and obviously get some funding and for you guys.
It'd be like extreme camping.
Look, I'm more of a glamper, Jen. I won't lie to you, but
Well, my joke last year, because I did do it, I don't even do camping. Like I'm not. That's so. And put in a position where it was like you don't have an option to not rough sleep. So Roughtober is put on the last Friday of every October, and it's a community sleep out, but it's our major fundraiser, so it raises probably a third of the income that we get for the year. And it's there's something again, not having done it, I couldn't see or envisage. I'm very visual. I couldn't understand how it would work or what was the magic in Roughtober, but it's something about this, bringing this whole community together to have the same experience. So last year we kept thinking, okay, COVID go away, COVID's not going away, okay, we're going to have to go virtual. So we had a virtual sleep out, but we could accommodate a small number of people at Rough Edges or at Darlow. And so we kind of had this parallel virtual broadcast for people that were sleeping out either in school halls or gardens or other areas, while I had this group running the live event at Darlinghurst. So we had some people who wanted to do the extreme sleep out, and they were sleeping next to, so where our building's next to a church, a building's actually under the church hall. So next to the church were people sleeping rough outside, and I was sleeping on a balcony. It was rough, above there, and all the doors were open. Just the noise alone at 3 a.m, like trucks were going over a speed hump, and you can hear every axle. It was illuminating, and yet something you just think you just don't. I did it once and was wrecked for about a week.
Right.
I couldn't sleep because I had this sort of duty of care for the people that were there, thinking, okay. And I honestly could not sleep because it was such an interesting experience. I get to do it again. We've got a private school, who are coming to do their sleep out with us in a few weeks, and they're like, which responsible adults are going to be there? And I'm like, oh, okay, I suppose that's me.
Yeah. When it said perks of the job in the job description, that's not what you imagined.
Look at it. It's something about it just works. So people come. We talk a lot about some of the issues. They all go out on urban walks with our walkers, and they come back and we reflect and we just talk about. And this sort of taps into a bit what people find when they do go on a walk, is that it's I think you can have all the empathy in the world, but then actually doing it once, and then going home to your comfortable bed, it just gives you that tiny, tiny insight into what that might be like for someone to do it, even on a short-term basis.
Were there any, because I assume, had you started your role and then you did the sleep out, so were there any additional takeouts? Did that, I guess, really highlight your purpose and your why actually doing that for the evening as well?
I think that I was in kind of event manager mode, so I think the why for me really comes back to the people and the talking to people that come to Rough Edges and getting to know them and their stories probably keeps reinforcing the why. And particularly, when you see people, and we have supported them along with other services, because that's the lovely thing about not-for-profit. It's so collaborative. So we work closely with Wayside and the other services nearby, with St Vincent's. with the drug and alcohol group, we're all working to the same purpose. So we're all working to support the people move into some sort of housing and have a quality of life. So I think just getting to know people's stories and understanding why, how we can help them. If we can help someone move into housing, and then from there, because once you've got housing, then you can start looking for a job. So, we've got some lovely stories of people we've supported to get into housing, and then they've picked up a part-time job, and then they've been able to get a pet, and, and just their life, and then they might circle back and come and do a photography program.
Yeah. Well, it's like like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, that's one of the basics is a roof over your head.
Very much, yeah. So the basic is, safety and food.
Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah, we talk a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it's, you do that and then, what's the top line? You work to self-enlightenment. It's not self-enlightenment, but...
I can see the triangle, and I can't think of them, but but I know what you mean. We'll put the image. We'll put the image up. So you mentioned something there, which is awesome. It's the collaborative with the other community spaces. So the kind of short, long-term goal for Roughies and that community is to actually get your patrons in houses, in safe housing. How do you measure that progress? Do people have to register? When they come in for food, I mean, are you seeing more or less of the people? How are you, I guess, tracking the program?
How do we track our impact?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we, a lot about our space is, people, so we have people that come in for a meal and then they go. They may not want to engage, and that's absolutely fine. We have people that, come and they settle and they get to know us. So a lot of it is built on trust. So people need to trust you because, sometimes they've been so let down by systems and services that it becomes a personal relationship. So we kind of do a few measurements. One is simply just, we measure meals. So we work closely in terms of the collaborative piece with Oz Harvest to provide meals and food to us.
Yep.
What we try and do, because think about, if your life is unstable, you don't want to be having to run to Centrelink or run to this service or run. So we try and bring all the services to us. So for example, once a week, Orange Sky Laundry come. So people know that on a Friday they can bring their laundry and they can have a shower and they can get that done. Once a month we have a clothing outreach that come and bring clothing. So if people do need extra bits of clothing, that's there. Tomorrow, for example, Pets in the Park. Now, Pets in the Park is this fabulous service that come and they provide free veterinary services to people. A great comfort to a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness or have unstable housing is that they've got an animal, a companion animal.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing for all of us that love animals. So Pets in the Park is this great service. Last night we had a haircut group that come, short back and sidewalks, come in once a month and provide free haircuts. Because, again, giving people that dignity just about, let's get you a haircut. And we all know a haircut can sometimes make you feel 1,000,000%.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's bringing all the services to people rather than making them run around to different points.
Yeah. And that must be so good for corporates. That must give you, it must help with your journey to see that corporates want to get involved. Like, I wouldn't have thought about the haircut thing, but someone's gone, hey, we can give a few hours of a night and just be there, and then people can do that, and that's something that you can add to your service. So that must give you some reassurance, is the word I'm looking for, that other companies and other people are starting to think a little bit more about how they can get involved and you give their time and their services, which must bring a smile to the face.
Yeah.
So how big's the team at Rough Edges?
Oh, we're 4.5. The 0.5 is our half a lawyer. Oh, she's not half a lawyer. She works two half days a week. Not that there's anything wrong with it.
No.
No, she works 2 half days a week or a few hours. So, there's literally 4 of us. So it's also that case of if the Oz Harvest van turns up and no one else is there, you go and do it. Yeah. And that's the door goes and someone's looking for food or a social worker or something. We're all intimately involved in the running of the organisation.
Is it breakfast, lunch and dinner or just dinners?
We're open 6 nights per week, every night except Saturday, and then 2 days. And the days that we're open, that's Wednesdays and Fridays, is when our social worker, again, part-time social worker, is there. So we're right at this point where we would love to grow, and we have plans to grow. So we could effectively double our staff, because we could do with another social worker inside Rough Edges. We could do, and it could also run the programs. We could do with another case manager to work on our domestic violence service. And I'm looking for another person to help me with fundraising. So, we're kind of right at that point of, we can grow and, with growth, that can be painful, but it could also mean that we can do so much more. To do that, I need to raise some money.
Yeah. And what's like? Who would be your dream if someone came in with a magic number? I mean, are we talking millions? Are we talking thousands, hundreds of thousands? What would be that? So what you've just kind of described in terms of that next step, what's the dollar number you would need?
So we're a $500,000 organisation. So we're tiny in the scheme of a lot of places. I've set myself a challenge to raise 100,000 by 30th of June. So, and I've got a few campaigns.
This year? So this financial year?
Yeah.
How are we going?
So I've got 3 campaigns underway to do that. So just one of them is with the private school.
Yep.
Another is celebrating our 25 years, which is this year. And so we've got some activities that are going on to try and stimulate that. So
Confident you're going to hit the number?
Look, I like to give myself a challenge.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm pretty confident.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, before I ask my question, I want to thank you for your patience this morning, because Adriana and I obviously aren't well adept in this subject, but we were very keen to learn a bit more, and I guess give our audience an opportunity to learn a bit more as well. So thank you for taking the time on that one.
Oh.
The question we always ask at the end of every podcast is, if you have a dinner booked for 4 and you can invite 3 guests, who would they be and why?
I should have really prepped for this one, shouldn't I?
This is what we like.
So I'm reading Jacinda Ardern's book. I love Jacinda Ardern and what she stands for, and just the way her model of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's a model I would aspire to. There's a fabulous Dutch. The other one would be Malcolm Gladwell, because I love his stuff and I just think he's interesting. And then the third, is that 4 including me?
Including you.
So the other would.
In all fairness, we've had people that have booked their own private dining room, so it's okay. They've just gone on because this person.
There's an author that I love. He's a Dutch guy called Rutger Bregman, and his. So it's funny, all of mine tend to be authors, but he's written a book called Humankind, and it's. I mean, I think when you do change your model of the world. So for me, moving from IT to working in not-for-profit, and particularly in this space, and we're very frontline, meaning that, I spend my days talking to the people we support rather than it being theoretical. So it's very real. So I tend to be I find myself reading material that falls in with that. Rutger Bregman wrote The Utopia for Realists, which was a stunning book. And so then I had to follow up and read his second book. So and it talks about exactly some of the things we've spoken about, this model of, if you looked after the most vulnerable people in your society, what would society look like then? If governments actually stepped up and said, so I read a great, I think it was a Twitter post, and it had, okay, no more billionaires. Once you've made 999 million, every cent after that goes to health and education. You can get a trophy that says, I won capitalism, and we'll name a dog park after you. I thought, that is, how much is enough?
Yeah, that's true.
And money does not, the things that people that we support teach me is that you can't take money with you. And money itself has no meaning. It's what you do with your money that provides the meaning. So, yeah, I tend to be reading stuff that's about just societies and more equitable civilizations. So.
Brilliant. I like it.
Thank you very much for coming on today, Jen. How can people get a hold of you and how can people do their bit? So is there a Rough Edges website? Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, so we definitely have a website. It's just roughedges.org.au.
We'll put the link in the description as well.
Actually, I think it's just org. I'm going to have to check that. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to find me, Jen Webster. And, yeah, we certainly are on socials as well. But, yeah, would love to have groups come and do an urban walk because that kind of makes it real. And especially hearing someone's story, you just kind of go, that could be anyone we know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, would love to have people reach out and find out how they can do some work with us and help me get to that 100,000.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Easy.
Thank you so much, guys. Lovely to chat with you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen.